Survival doesn't live in the screaming chaos. I learned that in Kunar province, where chaos was just the noise that incompetence made, and the actual work happened in the silence underneath it. The 6 seconds between the mortar landing and the next one. The space between a soldier's last exhale and the moment you decided what his next breath was going to cost you. I had been making that decision since 2017. What they called chaos at Denton Regional Medical Center, I called a Tuesday. My name on the surgical board was Kim. Nurse Kim. The new float from the agency. The one with the quiet hands and no apparent opinions. They didn't know my last name for the first 2 weeks. That was intentional. Then a convoy of ranger vehicles pulled into the ambulance bay on a Thursday afternoon, and a captain with a 75th Ranger Regiment tab on his shoulder stood in the middle of my surgical floor and said one word that I had not heard spoken in the direction of my face in 3 years. And the room, which had been operating at its usual pitch of managed noise, went completely silent. Let me tell you how Thursday started. Denton Regional was a teaching hospital that had recently been designated a trauma center, a fact that its surgical department wore with the particular pride of an institution that had been told it was important and had not yet discovered the gap between designation and capability. The hallways smelled of institutional bleach and the coffee that had been burning since 6 in the morning, and the faint, sweet decay of Dekia from pre-op Bay 4, which someone was going to catch eventually. The overhead lighting in the surgical wing was the overhead exam lamp variety. Hard shadows, bright centers. The kind of light designed for precision that made everything outside the surgical field look slightly unreal. I moved through it in the standard issue scrubs of a contract float nurse, which was the correct camouflage for what I needed to be. I found the exits my first morning, left stairwell past the anesthesia workroom, service elevator with the exterior loading dock, fire door at the end of the pre-op corridor. 3, always 3, minimum. I did not decide to count them. The habit was installed. I had been scrubbing in on general surgical cases for 11 days, the ones the regular staff didn't want. The long reconstructive cases, the late afternoon slots nobody fought over. I did not talk more than the work required. I did not eat in the break room. I did not accumulate the kind of presence that makes people ask questions. The scrub techs knew I was competent because my instrument counts were always correct and I never had to ask twice for anything. That was enough. That was the point. To the surgical team, a well-run operating room was a controlled environment that required full attention and careful management. To me, it was the quietest room I'd worked in 8 years. No incoming, no engagement reports, no threat assessment to run simultaneously with the clinical picture. Just the procedure, the team, the patient, and the specific music of a surgical suite at full function, the rhythmic sighing of the ventilator, the precise cadence of the scrub tech laying instruments in sequence, the particular compressed air hiss of the Bovie cauterizing tissue. I found it restful, in the way that a person who has lived through the loud version of a thing finds the quiet version restful. Dr. James Colfax was the chief of surgery. He had been at Denton Regional for 19 years, long enough to have made the surgical department into a reflection of his particular personality, which was the personality of a man who valued hierarchy the way other men valued oxygen, not consciously, just as the first condition of existence. He was compact and precise and always smelled of the specific antiseptic soap from the scrub sink, the clean version of a smell that I had known in a significantly less clean context in Kunar. And he moved through his surgical floor with the ownership of a man who had not had a decision questioned in a long time. He came through pre-op at 8:40 Thursday morning while I was preparing the instrument setup for the first case. Who authorized this layout? I looked at the tray. The instruments were in the sequence the lead scrub tech had approved 2 cases ago, the sequence that worked, that I had spent a week learning the specific logic of. Follows the standard protocol for this case type, I said. That's not the standard protocol. Colfax's voice was carrying through the pre-op bay, past the anesthesia cart, to the two residents and the circulating nurse, who had all found something requiring their attention in the middle distance. The standard protocol puts the retractors right of center. These are left. The lead tech repositioned them last Tuesday. It reduces the scrub nurse's reach distance for the primary handoff sequence. I didn't ask for an ergonomics lecture. He looked at me in the specific way that men who have not had decisions questioned look at the person who is questioning a decision. Not with anger, exactly, but with the faint surprise of encountering an obstacle where no obstacle should exist. I don't know you. What agency are you from? MediStaff, and MediStaff trains its float staff to reconfigure surgical layouts without attending authorization? The lead tech is not the attending. His voice had found the carrying register now, the one designed to reach all corners of the room. If I walk into my pre-op and find a layout that deviates from my protocol, I expect the person responsible to have my authorization on file. Do you have my authorization on file? There was a version of this moment in which I said what I could have said. I had a combat medical badge, a ranger tab, and 3 tours in Kunar province in the specific field of making precise decisions under conditions that would have stopped every person in that pre-op bay cold. I had scrubbed in on field surgical procedures in situations where the light source was a headlamp and the sterile field was optimistic at best. I had repositioned retractors under fire. I said none of that. No, I said. I'll restore the original layout. See that you do. He looked at the tray once more, at me once more, and then he left, and the circulating nurse looked at her checklist, and the residents looked at their shoes, and the pre-op bay recalibrated itself around the absence of the most important person in it. I restored the layout. The lead scrub tech, Rosario, passed me at the instrument sync 40 minutes later and glanced at the tray. That's wrong, she said quietly. I know, I said. She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone assembling a picture they don't have all the pieces for yet. Then she moved on. I took 15 minutes in the scrub lounge between cases, which was a narrow room with 2 benches and a window that faced the parking structure, and I sat on the bench nearest the door and let the 15 minutes happen. The parking structure outside was concrete and gray and unremarkable. I looked at it anyway. There was a particular quality of light at this hour of the morning, still angled, the shadows long, that reminded me of Kunar in the early shift, before the heat settled in, when the visibility was good and the threat level was merely elevated rather than acute. I had done some of my best work in that light. I had also lost people in it. I had been a Special Operations Combat Medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion, 2nd Ranger Regimental Combat Team, for 8 years before the thing in Kunar in 2022 that I did not allow myself to revisit in scrub lounges in teaching hospitals in Texas. Not because it broke me, because the version of me that came out of it needed somewhere quiet enough to figure out what she was going to build next, and she had not yet found it. And in the meantime there was the work, which had always been good, and the exits, which she always counted, and the hands, which had never forgotten anything they'd learned. I was so tired. Not the kind that sleep addresses. I thought about the pre-op layout. I thought about Rosario's face at the instrument sync. I thought about the fact that Colfax's protocol added 11 seconds to the primary handoff sequence, and that 11 seconds was a specific and concrete cost in the specific and concrete theater where those seconds mattered. I had the number because I had counted. I did not say any of this. I put the thought where I put most of my thoughts and went back to work. The second incident happened at 11:15, before the third case. Colfax was doing his pre-procedure walk through the scrub area when he passed the station where I was reviewing the implant inventory for a hip arthroplasty. "Are you on this case?" "Circulating," I said. "Who assigned you?" "The charge desk." He looked at the implant manifest I was holding. He looked at me. Float nurses don't circulate arthroplasty independently. There's a learning curve on implant sequencing that agency staff generally hasn't completed. "I've circulated 14 arthroplasties," I said. "Not in my department." He took the manifest from my hand, not aggressively, but with the flat efficiency of a man reclaiming property. "I'll have one of the regular staff cover this case. You can observe." In the pre-op bay behind him, Mr. Leonard Pacheco, 74 years old, Korean War-era veteran, bilateral hip deterioration from a career that had asked more of his body than his body had budgeted for, was watching from his gurney. He had the particular stillness of a man who has been patient with systems that did not move at his pace and had made his peace with it. His eyes found mine for a moment, and then moved away. He had been waiting since 6 that morning. He would wait as long as it took. He was that kind of man. "Doctor?" Colfax had no idea that the float nurse he had just removed from the implant manifest had personally kept 6 Rangers alive during a complex casualty extraction in Kunar Province, in conditions that required a level of surgical support that no one in his department would ever have to produce. He had no idea that her hands had done work in the dark and the dust that made his surgical suite look, by comparison, straightforward. He did not know any of this. He was operating on what he could see, which was a badge that said Metastaff and a face that gave him nothing. I observed. I stood against the wall, and I watched Colfax do competent, careful, impeccable work, which he was genuinely good at. I gave him that, the way you give anyone the thing they've actually earned, and I watched the circulating nurse navigate the implant sequence with 2 moments of hesitation that cost them approximately 23 seconds, combined, and a brief instrument reach across the sterile field that Colfax did not notice, but that I noticed, and that would not have happened with a different layout. I kept this to myself. I went back to the float board. At 2:17 Thursday afternoon, standing at the scrub sink preparing for a vascular case, I felt it. In my hands first. Both of them on the scrub brush, and the brush stopped moving because my hands had registered something that my brain was a half-second behind on. Then in my feet through the tile floor, a low, rhythmic, below-conscious threshold vibration that was not evac, and was not the elevator, and was not the equipment on the floor above. Then in my jaw. Then in the specific frequency of the back teeth on the right side that I had not felt since Kunar, and that meant one thing. Rotors, heavy class, multiple aircraft. I set the brush down on the scrub sink ledge. I stood still and I listened with my body, which was faster than my ears. The vibration had a count in it, the interval between compressions, the blade cycle. I closed my eyes for 4 seconds. 3 aircraft, possibly 4. Too heavy for Apaches. Too slow and measured for Black Hawks in a hurry. The weight and the cycle said Chinook or, and then the second interval confirmed it, no. The light, fast thud of a direct drive turbine, smaller than a Chinook, heavier than a civilian medevac. The MH-6 Little Bird was too light. The H-60 Pave Hawk was close, but the interval was wrong. MH-60L Blackhawks. Ranger configuration. Not 1, and not 2. The formation said 3 in a trail insertion approach, which meant this was not a standard medical transfer. This was an extraction response, and it was landing somewhere it should not be landing. which meant whatever was in those aircraft was too critical for the helipad. My hands came off the scrub sink. No, I thought. You are a float nurse. You are circulating a vascular case. You count instruments, and you check implant manifests, and you go home to a quiet apartment, and you figure out what comes next at your own pace. I put my hands in my scrub pockets. I pressed my back against the tile wall beside the scrub sink. I looked at the floor drain, and I told myself very clearly, not your call. Not your name anymore. From the direction of the main surgical floor, through 2 doors and 40 feet of corridor, I heard a monitor alarm change pitch, the specific escalating sequence of a patient decompensating rather than just fluctuating. And then a voice that I identified as Colfax's losing its carrying quality and gaining a different quality. The quality of a voice that has reached the edge of its training. My hands and my pockets had found each other. They were gripping. They were the only part of me that was not holding still. The door from the surgical floor opened. A resident appeared. He looked at me the way residents look when they are looking for any available competence. Colfax wants the surgical floor cleared of non-essential personnel, he said. Float staff to the family waiting area. I looked at him. I went to the family waiting area. It was a room with chairs in a row along one wall, and a window that looked out on the parking structure, and a television mounted in the corner showing a cooking program at low volume. I sat in the chair closest to the corridor door. I could hear, from the direction of the main floor, the escalating specific language of a team approaching the boundary of what they could manage. And then through the corridor wall I heard the sound change. Not the patient, the building. The vibration came back, different now, closer. The aircraft no longer at approach distance, but at touchdown distance. And then the rolling engine down sequence of military rotors cutting power after a hot landing, and then boots on a hard surface somewhere below, moving fast. And then the muffled but unmistakable sound of a door that was not being opened, but being passed through. I stood up. I went to the waiting area door and I looked through the narrow window into the corridor. They were already past me. 5 of them, moving in the controlled, purposeful formation that I recognized in my chest before my eyes had fully processed the uniforms. The khaki of Army combat uniforms. The specific kit of a Ranger regimental response element. The 75th tab visible on the lead operator's shoulder as he passed my narrow window and did not look at me because he was looking forward. Behind the operators, a captain, full dress, the regimental crest on the beret, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone navigating a building that is not the building he trained in, but close enough. And behind the captain, carried by 2 Rangers on a portable litter, a casualty, field-dressed, the bandaging showing through the opened acu blouse and a pattern I could read from 8 feet through a narrow window. X, right thoracic. The field dressing had been placed correctly. The casualty was conscious. He was in better shape than the blood loss suggested, which meant the field medic had done good work. And then the field medic was gone, and the casualty was here, and the surgical floor had a captain with a Ranger tab who did not know that the best surgical support in this building was currently sitting in a family waiting room watching a cooking program. I pushed the waiting area door open. The captain was at the main desk. Colfax was in front of him with the carrying voice posture fully assembled, the posture of a man invoking the authority of his position as a shield. "This is a sterile surgical environment," Colfax said. "You cannot bring personnel and equipment through here without... I need a surgeon with combat trauma experience," the captain said. He did not look at Colfax when he said it. He was looking at the department, at all of it, with the inventory scan that I recognized. Forward surgical team. Ranger support. Anyone here served? Colfax said something about his credentials and his department. The captain had already moved past him. He stood in the center of the surgical floor. He scanned. One face at a time. He was looking for something specific in the way that people trained to locate specific things look. Not searching, reading. And then he went still. His eyes had stopped moving. Because I was standing in the door of the family waiting area, and I was the only person in the corridor who had not come toward him. I had come as far as the doorway and stopped. I had not moved toward the noise the way civilian staff moved toward it. I was standing at the threshold the way a person stands at a threshold when they are deciding whether to cross it. The captain took one step in my direction. "Iron 6, he said. Not a question. A statement, delivered at normal conversational volume into a room that had gone completely quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has just happened that the room does not yet have words for. Nobody moved. The scrub techs looked at each other. The residents looked at the captain. Colfax looked at the captain, and then at the staff, and then at the captain again. The surgical floor held its breath. I was the only person not looking for the source. I was looking at the doorframe. Then at my hands. Then at the captain. I crossed the threshold. I walked to him with the specific gait of a person who has stopped managing the distance between who they are and where they're standing, who has let the two things come together after a long time apart. Not fast. Not slow. Even aligned. "I'm not Iron 6 anymore," I said. My voice was the other voice. Lower, with room in it. The one that had called grid coordinates in Kunar at 2 a.m. with one hand on a casualty and one hand on the radio. "I'm Nurse Kim. I work the floatboard." I looked at the litter, at the bandaging, at the specific picture of the casualty that I had been reading through the window. But I know what that man needs, and I know how long he has. The captain looked at me. He looked at the casualty. He looked at me again. "Then let's not waste it," he said. I turned. Colfax was 3 feet behind me. "No," I said. One word. The voice that came with it had been built in conditions that made no room for softness, and Colfax felt all of it without my needing to catalog any of it for him. He did not step back so much as simply find himself a step back, the body moving before the decision caught up. I walked to the litter. I put my hands on the patient's chest, not to assess the wound had been dressed correctly, but to read the rest of him, the things the wound had told the rest of the body to do while the field medic's back was turned. His breathing rate was elevated, but not critical. His skin was clammy and cold, and going toward the gray that preceded the specific kind of crash I was trying to prevent. His neck veins were flat, which told me the right side of his chest was doing what the right side of the chest does when it has been opened by a round and the pleural space has been compromised without tension. Hemothorax accumulating. The field dressing had addressed the entry wound. Nobody had addressed the accumulation. I need a 32 French chest tube, a pleur-evac, a trocar if you have it, a size 15 blade, and someone to take over managing this airway who will not flinch during the procedure. I looked at Rosario, the scrub tech, who had come to the edge of the instrument room and was watching with the expression of someone assembling a picture that was almost complete. "That's you, Rosario," she moved. She had the instruments before I finished saying what I needed, because she had been listening to what I needed since I walked through the door and was already 3 steps ahead. I found the 4th intercostal space, mid-axillary line, right side, above the 5th rib to avoid the neurovascular bundle, the same anatomy in the same position it always occupied. With 2 fingers of my left hand, moving with the muscle memory of 8 years of field surgical practice and the specific voice of a senior medic named Holbrook, who had drilled this landmark into me at Fort Benning. In 2015, until my hands could find it in the dark, in the rain, in the back of a vehicle at speed. I heard his voice now doing what it always did, counting the landmarks in sequence, patient and exact, the same count every time until the count lived in the hands. The blade went through. I blunt dissected to the pleural space. 2 fingers. Specific pressure, the specific pop of the parietal pleura giving way. And then the blood. Dark, deoxygenated. The blood that had been sitting in the pleural space compressing his lung. And the sound of it draining, and the corresponding change in the quality of the casualty's breathing. The chest rising more fully on the right side. The work of breathing decreasing, the color beginning its slow return from gray. I placed the tube, secured it, connected the drainage system, looked at the output, the first 50 milliliters, the rate of drainage, the color, and looked at the casualty's face. He was looking at me. "Hey," I said. "You're doing fine. The lung is coming back up. You keep breathing just like that." He gave me a nod that cost him something. Rangers nod like that, like the nod is a signature on something. 350 out and slowing, one of the operators said from behind me, reading the drainage system. Pressure's coming up, 90 over 60. "Give him another minute," I said. "He'll tell us." The captain was standing at the edge of the procedure field. He was not watching the patient. He was watching my hands, which had not shaken, which had not hesitated, which had moved through the procedure with the specific confidence of 10,000 repetitions in circumstances that made this surgical floor look like a controlled experiment. "She operated," he said quietly, to no one, like she never left. The revelation came from the captain's aide, who had a service record on a tablet and who stood in the center of Colfax's surgical floor and read from it in the same clear, carrying voice that Colfax had deployed against me all day. Only the content was different, and the direction was different, and what it put in the room was different. Sergeant First Class Kim Nakamura, United States Army, Combat Medic, 75th Ranger Regiment, 2nd Battalion. 8 years active duty. 4 combat deployments. Kunar Province and Logar Province. Afghanistan. Forward Surgical Team Medic, SOATAC qualified. Credited with keeping 6 Rangers viable during a complex casualty extraction in Kunar Province in November 2022, including 2 critical penetrating thoracic injuries performed under fire in zero-light conditions. Recipient of the Army Commendation Medal with Valor Device, the Combat Medical Badge, and the Bronze Star with Valor Device. The aide lowered the tablet. A pause that had weight in it. She has been working contract float pool for 3 years. The surgical floor was absolutely quiet. Colfax was standing near the instrument room door. I looked at him once, the way you look at something you are closing a chapter on, and what I saw in his face was not what I expected. Not arrogance collapsing, not shock performing itself, but something smaller and more permanent. The slight open quality of a mouth whose owner has just discovered that the floor plan of the 19 years he'd spent building this department contained a room he had not known was there. He had no expression that covered it. Mr. Pacheco, in Pre-Op Bay 2, whose case had been delayed by the afternoon's events, who was still waiting with the patient patience of a man who had waited for larger things than surgical schedules, raised his head when the aide finished reading. He was 74 years old, and he had served in Korea, and he had that tattoo on his forearm, and he looked at me across the distance of the Pre-Op Bay with an expression that I did not need translated. He put his hand on his chest, over his heart. Flat palm, an old gesture. The kind that certain people know and certain people don't. I put mine there too. The captain stepped forward. He saluted 5 of them, simultaneously, the captain and his 4 rangers, the gear shift whisper of their kit settling into the angle of a held salute. The specific sound of military discipline made audible in a surgical floor that had never heard it before. Rosario had both hands over her mouth. The circulating nurse was not moving. One of the residents had turned away toward the instrument room for reasons that were not my business. I returned the salute. Correct angle. Correct duration. The grammar of it. The only grammar that doesn't require translation. "Sergeant," the captain said. "Sir," I said. The formal review of Dr. Colfax's conduct pattern was opened 5 days later by the hospital's medical director. Following statements from Rosario, both surgical residents present that afternoon, and submitted separately and without my knowledge until afterward, a 1-page account from Mr. Leonard Pacheco, 7th Cavalry, Korean War, who had dictated it to his daughter from his recovery room on the morning after his surgery. He had asked for a copy. His daughter had asked if there was anything else he needed. He had said, "Just make sure she gets the credit she's owed." I did not attend the review. I was in pre-op, reviewing an implant manifest, the correct one, in the layout that made sense. I finished the manifest. I set it on the instrument tray, in the order that reduced reach distance by 11 seconds, and I went to the scrub sink and ran the water hot and scrubbed my hands the way I had scrubbed them 10,000 times. The specific rhythm of it. The same count every time. The hands that never forgot anything. I don't need the recognition. I just do the work. If Kim's story hit somewhere real, if it stayed with you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories of the ones who show up quietly and do the work without asking to be seen. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels.